Welcome back to My Home is Special. This is the recap episode for Loop 3, our trip in Africa and Europe. And it also rounds out the travel episodes for the first incarnation of My Home is Special. And I'm joined by my buddy Taylor once again. Taylor, welcome back.
Thank you once again for having me.
All right, Taylor, you ready to do this one more time?
Let's do it. Keith, the last episode was I think our last episode. So you're officially done with travel now, correct?
I am. We got back to the U.S. June 14th. I started back at work July 1st. Short week wasn't a bad way to start back, but we are officially done with travel. And I got to admit, we did look up at each other the other day and kind of go, man, we need to get back on the road, but we're going to keep our black asses here for now.
Oh, okay. Dang, I was hoping you were going to say, no, we have a surprise country in store.
No such thing, but I did volunteer to do a training in LA during a week in September because my son is out there. And they said, well, we're not doing that training in LA until next year, but we are doing it in Rome. And I said, well, I'm still free that week, so I'll be going to Rome in a couple weeks. So there'll be an Italy episode probably later this fall.
I knew we could get one more out of you.
I had to, but man, we did a lot on the first couple.
Let's talk about that. Let's run through the stats actually. So how many countries, how many people have been following along? Just run me through all of the stats that you have as far as just your travels.
In terms of travel, we took 42 flights. We checked into hotels 42 times. We also traveled using 2 cruises, I think 6 or 7 buses, maybe 8 or 9 private cars. And on the creative side, I took about 21,000 photos and organized them into about 60-something galleries on my website. So there is a lot of content in addition to the 33 podcast episodes, including this one. And I'm proud to say that 15 of those were country podcasts, and you were involved in the rest of them, which I think is 18 if I can do the math right.
Wait, people have heard my voice 18 different times now on this podcast?
18 different times, Taylor. And I got to say, my mom specifically said, I love Taylor. So she's looking forward to meeting you when she's back in Chicago. Shout out to my mom.
So excited. I can't wait to meet her.
And it was really neat to hear that she was enjoying the podcast. But what's been really neat is that as people are sort of getting up on the concept, they're sharing it with friends. So Tasha gets a daily text from one of her friends that's using the podcast on her daily walks. And that's really neat to hear as well, because I think we did something pretty creative here. And I'm glad that people are really getting to dig into it and really hear what it's like to travel the way we did and experience culture the way we did. So I'm really proud of that.
Any clue on how many subscribers we have?
So from a listener standpoint, I think we have several dozen regular listeners. We passed 2,000 downloads a couple weeks ago, which was a pretty neat milestone. And we're well on our way to 3,000, actually. It's been a big month. And part of what we're hearing is that people are getting the concept and just working it into their daily routine. So shout out to Cindy, who I know is listening to this episode. I think she's one of several people who have told us, they just do it on their daily walk while they're walking their dog or in their exercise, and they just dig into a 30-minute episode or so. We did get some criticism, Taylor, for the Egypt episode, I think, which was a little bit longer, so that might be a 2-walk episode. Generally speaking, I think people are enjoying it and sharing it as they hear it and get into it a little bit more.
Well, thank you to everyone that's sharing. Continue to share, and I'm so excited that it's growing. This community is really growing now. Keith, there is a big looming question I think all of our audience members have, and I know I have. So I'm just going to go right out and ask it.
Yep.
What's their favorite country? And be honest.
Honestly, no. And
Oh.
I don't think we thought about it that way. So first of all, let me say, I get asked that a lot, especially now that I'm back at work, because it's the obvious question. Like if people haven't seen me in 6 months, they're like, where you been? I said, well, I was traveling. Where'd you go? Everywhere. What was your favorite place? And then it's like we're at a standstill. What I would say is hopefully people listening to this heard it in the episodes, but we did something special every place we went. And it's tricky to sort of say what was your favorite because we had the blessing of having like once in a lifetime experiences almost everywhere we went. And sometimes it was something we saw, sometimes it was something we ate. A lot of times it was just something we experienced that really immersed us in the local culture. And so it's hard to say like this was my favorite. What I would say is 2 things. One, when people do ask, because they sort of go, okay, no, but seriously, give us an answer. Like they're gonna, like they sort of circle me, like they're gonna, like they're threatening me or something. And what I would say is that Bolivia was by far the most surprising place. La Paz was nice, Lake Titicaca was nice, but going to the Uyuni salt flats was unlike anything I've ever seen before, anywhere on Earth. And I saw the pictures, I kind of knew what to expect, but that place just blew me away. And we were there for 3 days, and every time we went out onto the salt flats, it was just surreal. And I think the pictures on the website bring that to life in a way that pictures couldn't bring to life other places. People see the video and the photos from Uyuni, and they're like, oh my goodness, that place is amazing. And I'm like, yes, and you should go see it for yourself because there's nothing else like it. The other thing that I would say is I've wanted to go to Egypt forever. And I think I talk about this in the Egypt episode where I just rambled on and on and on. But it was just unbelievably amazing. I was just telling people the other day, like that is the spot where, of all the places I was excited to go, a lot of them met our expectations and they were very high, but Egypt just blew them away. And so Bolivia and Egypt were the two places that I would say stood out when I think about the trips. But everywhere we went, there was just something that I saw that I knew would stay with me, or something that I experienced that I knew would stay with me. And in that sense, I don't have a favorite, but those two stand out as places where I'm like, man, I'm so glad I went there.
That was a great answer just to say no. I was not expecting Bolivia, but I was expecting Egypt. So that's really cool to hear, though, that at least there were some very memorable moments that just stood out overall.
There were a ton of them, and it's a bit of a blur, and it's been funny listening to these podcasts because I take notes as I go. So I'm like, oh, Taylor's going to ask me about this. Listening to the podcast is a good way to remember what we did on all these trips, and I wasn't expecting Bolivia either. People also ask, like they look at the podcast now and there's 33 episodes and like, where should I start? And I usually tell them that Chile and Cambodia were the two episodes that I think best demonstrate what I was trying to do with the podcast in terms of how personal both Caro and Meta got. Ironically, Meta didn't even grow up in Cambodia, but the way they talk about home and then what we got to see while we were there was a good example of what we're trying to do. But honestly, Taylor, every episode interview was great on the front end. And then I've really enjoyed talking with you on the back end. And so I encourage people to sort of go through and listen to them in pairs. I also managed to set up a Spotify playlist that actually has the countries in order by pairs instead of the way we release them. Apple Music needs to get its act together. But when it does, I'll put that playlist out too.
I would definitely agree with you that it feels like a lot of this has just kind of gone by in a blur. To think that I've been on 18 episodes and we've talked about all of these countries together, it's kind of like, whoa, where is the time gone?
Right.
So I am going to ask you to kind of go back a little bit. We never actually did a recap of Loop 3 like we've done the recaps of the other two loops. So I think it's important we do one now. So let's kind of start with just what was it like, between all the countries that you did in Loop 3 and kind of remind listeners of what we've talked about these last couple of weeks.
For those who've been listening, they'll remember that Loop 3 was probably the least planned one because we had to give our passports up between 2 and 3. So we didn't really know where we were going, except that we were going someplace and we'd pick up the trip whenever we could leave the country. So we ended up starting in Ghana. We couldn't get to Ivory Coast and Nigeria because of visa issues. I couldn't get a visa for Nigeria because I only had time to mail my passport to one embassy. And then Cote d'Ivoire didn't work from a timing perspective. We ended up starting in Ghana. We met with the boys in Portugal. Then we hopped over to Greece and saw a lot of broken statues and some really cool sites. And then went down to Egypt and finished with England and Wales. And so that was Loop 3. And what was interesting for us there was it was really the first trip where I would say we bounced between developed markets and developing markets. Going from Ghana to Portugal is going from emerging market to emerged market. And then going from Greece to Egypt is going the other way. And then back to England, arguably one of the more developed economies anywhere. I'm not sure how I can say this, but that was very different from the pace, from the amenities, from the resources, from all of the things that you expect in a developed market. Calling Uber in Portugal was entirely different than calling Uber in Ghana. Things as simple as brushing your teeth and drinking the water, which you could do in Portugal and Greece, but you couldn't necessarily do that in Egypt and Ghana. There's all these little things, so you almost had to code switch in a way that was really different for us, traveling like that. Now, we had done both in other trips. In Loop 2, we went from Korea, very developed, to Southeast Asia, emerging. And South America, depending on where we were, was a mix of the two. But this was the first time we actually went back and forth between developed and developing markets.
It kind of sounds like there was almost a theme there of kind of jumping between these different countries. And I know we talked a lot about, especially I think between England and Portugal, and Greece as well, kind of how there was this almost this little bit of a distance between the type of countries that are, typically imperialistic and ones that are not. So I think that was kind of a theme. And did you feel like that was picked up? And I think we talked about a lot about that.
It worked out that way. You'd be giving me too much credit, or I'd be lying if I said that that was by design for the trip. I think our itinerary and the timing and the boys' schedules dictated the routing, if you will. But it was different going to countries like Portugal and like England that have long colonial histories. And we had visited countries that they had colonized. And it was different to see how they think about their history and the accountability that they have. I would say in England, we visited a church in Bristol where, ironically, as we're recording this, sort of the right-wing neo-fascists are rioting, going after immigrants in Bristol with, burning down the hotels where the immigrants are living, or trying to at least. We did go to a church right next to our hotel in Bristol that had a display on Bristol, the church, or England's role in the slave trade. And it talked about the history, and it was this big sort of, it took us probably 45 minutes to go through the whole exhibit. But it was interesting to see some type of acknowledgement and recognition and discussion of their past. And we didn't see that a lot. We had an interesting experience with our guide in Portugal, who was a black queer woman giving a tour on being black in Portugal, or some of the black culture in Portugal. And that's something that I do everywhere I go if I can. And she was making the point that Portugal is oddly proud of its colonial history in a way that other places are not. And in her view, it was because they don't have a lot else to hang their hat on. And if you reckon with the history, or you deal and wrestle with the history that they have, there's this sense that some of their national identity would be stripped away. Now, I didn't pick that up when I talked with Joao or any of my other Portuguese friends, but it was interesting to hear that perspective, given Portugal did have a very robust colonial history. And we didn't go to Brazil this trip, and we didn't go to Cape Verde because we had been before, so we didn't get to see a lot of the Portuguese colonial history on our trips, but we did go to Portugal, and they are very proud of their influence around the world, even though I would argue maybe there's parts of it they shouldn't be proud of.
It sounds like there still maybe is a lot left to visit and see, maybe?
Yeah, that was one of the unfortunate parts of this. There are probably still a couple dozen countries on the list that we want to visit, but we won't be able to string them together in a 6-month globe-trotting, gallivanting trip like we did this time. But there is still a lot on the list, so we'll have to start with hopefully Italy later this fall, and then next year we'll pick back up the mantle and start working our way back through the list.
I've mentioned this once before because I think what you're capable of doing when it comes to traveling is mind-blowingly phenomenal. So I think maybe let's delve a little bit into the ways that you figured out traveling, how you're able to, like you said, gallivant for 6 months and reasonably still have clean smelling clothes on your back. Let's talk about that.
That might be debatable given where you picked us up in some of these trips. I think I mentioned in the last one where it's a little bit like, it's clean enough to wear. Nobody will be close enough to realize that maybe this had been out in the sun for a little longer than it should have been. But kidding aside, Taylor, the early planning, as I mentioned before, was ChatGPT and looking at a map and just seeing what makes sense in terms of routing. Going from Ghana to Portugal to Greece to Egypt doesn't make a ton of sense until you look at the map and realize they're actually reasonably short trips if you start with the nonstop to Ghana. Everything else from there is no more than a 2 or 3 hour trip, which isn't very far. And when we did South America and Asia, it was the same thing. I routed it in a way to minimize flight time, because if you're not on a plane, then you're actually experiencing the culture. And so being on a plane zigzagging is kind of a waste of time. But there are a couple things logistically, Taylor, that are just, you just don't think about. In the Egypt episode, I think I talked about, you have to do laundry on these types of trips, but packing is really different. We pride ourselves on fitting everything into a wheelie and a backpack. We did 2 weeks last year to India, the Maldives, and Bhutan, and did it with one wheelie each, like a carry-on wheelie. And we couldn't pull that off here. If I had tried, I might have come back by myself, or I might have had to go by myself. But you got to pack a little bit different. I mentioned the laundry, but you got to pack supplies. Like, you'll run out of toothpaste on these trips. In my case, I need to cut my hair, even though it's not all growing back like it used to. So I had to bring clippers because I wasn't trusting myself with some local barber if I could even find one. You have to think about like the clothes. We did a couple of trips, South America and Asia, where we were in over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and we were also below freezing Fahrenheit. And so you got to pack some winter clothes, but not so many winter clothes. You have to bring an extra 7 bags with you. So logistically, there was a little bit of packing that we had to think through. We had to bring our own snacks. We had to bring just extra supplies. And then we also had to take some breaks and take some time alone. So I think Santiago was mid-trip and we didn't plan a lot and we just chilled a little bit there. When we got to Vietnam for the B-Boy battle, but we were in that particular city for a week. And the battle was 3 days, but we had days on either side of it to just relax a little bit. And if we want to get up and go eat breakfast alone and work out and catch up with each other at lunch, totally fine. And I think we did that almost every day in Vietnam. If people say, how many for breakfast? I was like, 1. My wife may join me. My wife may come after me. So give me a table for 1, please. And the last part about being on the road for so long and the logistics was just making sure that you have time to work out. Because for us, that's pretty important. And it's a good sanity break. And you could just run and be exhausted. But I tried to keep my streak alive. I would say Tasha did a better job working out than I did. Sometimes I was doing my 5-minute standing yoga or 5-minute stretch on an app. But I was counting it. And then eating like a sane person is obviously the other side of that. I think somewhere during trip 2, we realized we can't eat like we're on vacation every day when we're on the road this long. So you have to eat sane. You got to take a break. You got to work out, all of those good things.
And you put a lot of thought into actually doing production for the podcast, because during this, you were kind of doing a whole project on top of just traveling. So I guess kind of talk about the logistics of being a creative while traveling as well.
The first thing was just back to logistics a little bit, which was stopping for more than one day to get the right photos. In Angkor Wat, in Egypt, and a few other places, I built in dead time where I just said, we're not going to do anything that day, or we'd have a guide and I'd say, well, put in a free day for us because I might want to go back and take photos. So part of it for me this time was making sure that I had the light where I wanted it, that the sun was at the right spot, the crowd was in the right places, mainly not in my photos. And so unlike other trips where you have one day, you see the thing and you either got it or you didn't, I had time to go back and get the right photos. I didn't work out all the time, but for the most part I did. But I think what you're alluding to was this podcast. And for the first time that I've traveled, I actually had to pay attention to the sounds around me. I usually spend my time walking around looking at the light and looking for the photo. But somewhere after the South America episode started coming out, I realized that I should also be listening for the right sounds so this can be a more immersive experience. And all of these recap episodes, not this one, but all the country recaps, the audio that's playing in those is actual audio that I recorded on the street or at an event or on a hike. And listening while we traveled was just totally different, Taylor. I don't know what the equivalent is, like when you become attuned to something and all of a sudden you just can't experience the world without being tuned into it. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Like now all of a sudden you're picking up on all the distinct sounds that make a place a place.
Right. Whereas before I would look for different angles and different sites. Now I'm doing that and listening. And I've never been one to walk around when I travel with my AirPods in, because I do think there's something about hearing that helps you find the right photos. But I've never really thought about traveling and listening and sort of saying, hey, Tosh, hang on a second. Let me get this audio. I'm thinking in the back of my mind, Taylor's going to like this. Which is really funny when I'm traveling. I will say that I brought my recorder on the first trip to South America and didn't take it out once. I recorded everything on my iPhone. So after that, I just used my iPhone to record audio, which is why the levels are so crazy on some of these episodes. But that was probably the new thing for me. And I don't know that I'll keep doing that, but it really brought a different sense of awareness and immersion to the trips that I didn't expect.
And I think it speaks to a sense of you're teaching a lot of us how to travel. So I think you're giving us a new concept of like what we should be taking in when we travel. Yes, we want to take the pictures so we can have the memories. And, when people ask at our jobs, hey, where did you go for the last 6 months? You have proof. Right. But now also you have this auditory sense of your vacation, of your travels, of your trip that kind of adds to the experience of it and what you can tell people. So I think you've given us something new to add to kind of our philosophy of traveling.
It was the immersion part will definitely stay with me. It was convenient that I was recording audio and had a place to share it. Because when people say, "Where did you go?" or "What did you see?" I don't think anybody wants to listen. Take out my iPhone at a party and be like, "Listen to this." It's the cicadas going at dawn at Angkor Wat. Like that's not really a thing. It's a lot less cool, right? Like I did shot put in college, and my son played soccer. Like you can go play soccer with your friends at the park, but nobody wants to go throw shot put with you in the park. Right? Like people want to see your vacation pictures. They don't want to listen to your vacation audio unless it's being discussed with Taylor on this podcast. So I guess in that sense, I'm pretty lucky.
I'm the only one probably that always wants to hear the vacation.
And Taylor, for that, I'm forever grateful. So thank you. Taylor, let's flip the script on this one. Now, you've been helping me out with this podcast. We met a few times at Grown Folk Stories and at Afrotech, and I was like, hey, I got a favor to ask. And here we are, sort of 18 episodes later. Again, thank you so much. But somewhere along the way, you mentioned that you have a podcast that you're going to be doing with your mom. And I thought to myself, what in the world is that going to be about? So why don't we start? What's the title of it, and what's the high-level concept that you're trying to pursue on it?
For sure. So, since we're flipping the script, this is fun. It's named Raising Taylor. And the concept of it is basically telling the story of me and my mom as mother and daughter and how she's learned how to be a really phenomenal parent and raise a very confident and capable daughter. Ever since I've been a young kid, people have asked my mom for a parenting book because she's just a phenomenon. She is. People have always said, when are you going to do a class? When are you going to write a book? I just need your help with parenting because my mom put so much into raising me. And so one day she was like, Taylor, I need to write this book. And I was like, how about we just do a podcast?
Right.
And ever since then, we have been working on finally getting this together. We have so many like intro episodes. We could literally have a compilation of bloopers of just intro episodes. But we're finally making this a real thing. And the whole concept is to really just help parents and children kind of have better conversations and grow their relationship. Because yes, my mom is my mom, but she's also like my best friend.
Right. And I always told my sons that. I said, look, I'm not your friend, I'm your dad. Being your dad includes elements of being your friend, but it also includes some other things. And we just make sure that we have those boundaries. That's really interesting to hear, Taylor. So is it an episode per topic or subject or life stage? How are you going to navigate the different episodes of this podcast?
So it's kind of all of that in one. We're going to tell stories about important things that we kind of reminisce on between her parenting style and how I've been able to respond to it as her child, as her daughter. But also, what is something that's really pressing when it comes to, I think, parenting nowadays? One big thing is that we have a lot of teenagers and a lot of young kids struggling with self-confidence because of social media.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about how my mom has been able to really navigate that with me and give me the confidence to still be on social media, but tell my own story and be who I am. So a lot of it is really just to create better conversation and really share like, hey, we kind of got this thing down packed. We're good at it. And this is kind of what you can do to become great at it too.
Now, I've seen you on the mic at Grown Folk Stories. Is there a chance your mom is going to come on here and spill all the tea about raising Taylor? That's kind of what I was hoping this was.
Yes, it actually really is. Like, you're going to hear everything that my mom and me have kind of gone through, both positive and, some of the ugly parts. But really, me and my mom have a really great relationship in the fact that we've always just kind of had this mental telepathy of like knowing each other. So you're really going to see an insight into why I am the way I am, is what I tell everybody who knows me that listens. You're going to finally be able to go, that's why Taylor does stuff like that. Because so it's really an insight into who I am, and also an insight into just what a really healthy relationship should look like when it comes to, parent and children.
And what I like about how you're describing it is it's a little bit more on storytelling and lived experience more than preaching, as though, in my case with 2 kids, or your mom's case with 1, we figured it out. And it's not that we figured it out, but there is something to be learned from sharing the experiences and pointing out the inflection points along the way and the lessons learned when you made a mistake.
My mom prides herself on being a really good mom. And I think it just took a lot of her really working through her own internal stuff. She's a therapist, so of course I asked what's it like being raised by a therapist. So this will give you insight into it as well. But My mom's a therapist. So my mom has done a lot of that internal work to become a better person and to also become a great mom. And so this also is really kind of helping people who may be navigating parenting and are struggling to kind of give them a space to really hear someone who just figured it out and
Right.
was able to make it not only just a great thing or be a good parent, but be a phenomenal one who has fun being a mom. My mom has fun being my mom, and I think that's one of the most beautiful parts of it.
And Taylor, does that include, you said figured it out past tense, but I imagine that being a good parent is different than being a perfect parent. Being a good parent has to do with how quickly you rebound and learn from mistakes. I like to tell my team at work, like, I don't mind making mistakes. Just try not to make the same one twice if you can avoid it.
Yes, 100%. Me and my mom are now, we call ourselves roommates because we still live together. And I'm so thankful that I have a great relationship with my mom where we can kind of live in the same house and still kind of, my mom's learning what it's like to live with me as an adult, and I'm learning what it's like to be with my mom as my own adult now. And we've come to find out that a lot of the things that might come up for most people living in the house with their parents doesn't come up for us because we kind of already know how to have those difficult conversations before they even show up and need to happen. And so just like the love and boundaries, like you mentioned, is something that we already kind of know. So we're not making those same mistakes twice. We're not going over and over and having the same conversations again about why I may need this or why she may need this. We have the one conversation and it's done, and we know how to really navigate those tougher situations together and come out on the other side still happy and loving each other the same way we started before.
That's dope. And Taylor, I'm going to steal a page from some of my favorite podcasts. When episode 1 comes out, I'm going to steal the audio from you, drop my own intro on top of it, and publish it out on this feed if that's all right with you and mom.
I would love that. And I know my mom would too. This is bittersweet for me because it means that we're moving into the next phase of My Home is Special, which is exciting because it means that we're continuing this. However, I won't get to hear all these amazing stories about where you've gone and where you traveled to again and feel like I'm on the plane with you guys. So, I guess, where are you taking us next as your listeners? And how are you planning on engaging us in My Home is Special still?
For the next couple months, we're going to take a break. So probably in October and November, people should expect episodes to start coming out again. One of the things, Taylor, you and I talked about pretty early on, and I mentioned in the intro, is that I didn't want to do a travel podcast. I didn't want to do a food podcast. Like, that's not really a thing. Maybe it turned into that from time to time. You called me on it when I did. But we didn't want to do a travel podcast. And maybe by virtue of what URLs were available, I settled on My Home is Special as the name for this project. And the sabbatical is done, so the back to back to back trips all over the world are done. But as I thought about where it could go next, I had a couple of ideas. You ready?
Yes, I'm so ready.
Okay. First thing I wanted to do was give people a chance to digest all the episodes that just came out. There's 33 episodes. A bunch of people were picking it up midway through. A bunch of people are keeping up with us, which is really cool. And I'm hoping that they're sharing that with their friends and encouraging them to go through. I'll post a link to the Spotify playlist in the show notes. But for every episode, there's 1 and 1R, 2 and 2R, and that's basically the before and after. The R stands for recap. And so I want to give people a chance to digest those episodes. The other thing that you and I have talked about was this concept of home. And for this first iteration, while I was on my sabbatical, we considered home a place, a city, a country, but a geographical place where people were literally from. But the more I thought about it, home doesn't have to be that. Home is where you feel like you can be your authentic self. Home is where you feel like you're meant to be. And you hear people say it all the time. Oh, she's right at home running on that trail. Or he's right at home when he's on stage telling a story. Or in the cipher at a dance battle. Or she's right at home in the operating room as a surgeon. And I realized that home can actually be something different than a place. And so what I want to do when I come back is interview people about their home, but home being defined as where they feel like they can be their authentic and best selves. And I want to explore a little bit about how they were introduced to that place. When it clicked for them, what was the moment where they said, oh, this is where I belong? And then what's special to them about being home, whether it's on a microphone, in an operating room, in the C-suite, on stage, or what have you. And that's what I'm going to do next.
It sounds like now you're really focusing on home being about belonging in a sense of what belonging feels like internally.
It does, and it's a little bit of saying, where do you feel like you were made to be? And so I'm going to put together a list of people I've already started that I think would be really fascinating to hear from. And keeping up with one of the things that we did on this podcast, I want to have a really diverse group of people. I don't want to just have a bunch of work friends who have degrees and have been all over the place and financially can do certain things. And I don't want to have a bunch of creatives. I want to have a mix of people coming at each notion of home from a different perspective so that it keeps it interesting and it keeps it fresh. And I also think that hopefully what people realize is that people think about home very similarly. Somebody asked me, how different are the country episodes? I said, well, the countries are different. But if you listen to all these episodes, Taylor, whether people are coming from, upper class, middle class, sort of recent graduates just starting out their journeys, whether they're in Asia or Africa or Europe or South America, they all kind of talk about home the same way. And my sense is that as much as we think people are different, they're actually quite similar. And once you get past how they look or how they talk or what language they're speaking, you realize actually what makes them tick is kind of the same thing that makes me tick. And the question I guess we're going to explore is, as you think about people finding that place where they belong, is that sense of belonging consistent across all types of people all around the world? And that's what I'm going to try and dig into. It's an ambitious goal, which is why I need a couple months to pull this off. But I'm going to hopefully start recording episodes maybe in about 2 months or so as we record this. It's the beginning of August. I'll give the Olympics time to finish, and then I'll get those emails out and hopefully record in September-ish and start releasing episodes in October. And we'll target maybe 1 or 2 a month and see how it's going.
I know I'm more than excited because it feels like now we won't just be learning how to travel, but we'll be learning how to be more authentic and how to show up as ourselves. And that's something that I think I'm ready to hear. And I know you're going to have some phenomenal people on the pod. I'll make sure of it.
Right. And of course, I'll put you on the spot here in front of everyone. But part of what I want to do is every couple episodes, I want to pull up and do a recap episode of how we're doing and where it's going. And I'd be thrilled to have you back on if you would join and talk through a seemingly random set of guests with no common theme tying them together.
Can I say anything but yes? Yes, of course.
No, you're not
course.
allowed to say anything but yes. But Taylor,
that's the only answer I have.
This might actually bring us to the end of this episode. We're pushing up probably a little over 30 minutes by the time we edit this down and produce it. But it's been a heck of a ride from that Thursday night at Grown Folk Stories where I said, hey, want to be on a podcast with me? And you said yes. What is it? In that order. And I'm so thrilled that you did that. So thank you. It's been a hell of a journey, and I appreciate you making the time to engage at crazy hours on short notice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's been truly special.
This has been one of the most phenomenal projects I've ever gotten the pleasure to be a part of. So thank you. And I can't wait to continue to talk to so many of our listeners and just connect with them and bring them these amazing podcasts. So let's do it.
All right. We'll give them an update on this podcast in a couple weeks. And Taylor, I will announce your podcast as well. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Talk soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of My Home is Special. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get future episodes automatically. Go to myhomeisspecial.com for the occasional email update too. That's where links to photo galleries and a few other surprises will live. Be sure to follow KBev Photo on Instagram for behind-the-scenes footage during our journey, and it'll be in the stories. If you just want the photos, go to kbevphoto.com. There's a lot else on there to explore. For now, this is Keith, aka KBev, signing off. Peace.